It was supposed to be just another night shift at the warehouse, a quiet, uneventful stretch of hours where I'd stack boxes, sip stale coffee, and count down the minutes until sunrise. But life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. The phone rang just after midnight. At first, I didn't recognize the number flashing on the screen. It wasn't Sarah's cell or our home line, so I almost ignored it. But something nagged at me, an uneasy feeling that made my chest tighten. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello. My voice sounded rougher than usual, like gravel grinding against asphalt. This is Officer Daniels with the city police, came the reply. The tone was clipped, urgent. Are you Mr. James Carter? Yes, I said, my heart suddenly pounding. What's wrong? Is everything okay? There was a pause, a beat too long, and then he spoke again. Sir, there's been an incident involving your wife, your brother, and your son. They've been brought to St. Mary's Hospital. I'm sorry, but I can't provide further details over the phone. Can you meet us there? The world tilted. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating, like someone had wrapped a vice around my lungs. What kind of incident? I managed to choke out, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I'm afraid I can't say more right now, the officer said gently. Just, please get to the hospital as soon as possible. I hung up without another word, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My mind raced, trying to piece together what could have happened. An accident? A fire? Something worse. All I knew for sure was that Sarah, Ethan, and little Jake were in trouble, serious trouble, and I needed to get to them. I clocked out faster than I ever had before, muttering vague apologies to my supervisor about a family emergency. The drive to St. Mary's felt like an eternity, every red light stretching into infinity, every passing car seeming impossibly slow. My thoughts spiraled wildly. Was Jake hurt? Was Sarah okay? What about Ethan? Why would they all be together in the middle of the night? By the time I pulled into the hospital parking lot, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool autumn air. I bolted inside, my boots echoing loudly against the sterile tile floor. The waiting room was dimly lit, empty except for a nurse behind the desk and a doctor pacing near the entrance to the ER. I'm looking for my family, I blurted out, my voice cracking. James Carter. My wife, my brother, and my son, they were brought here. The doctor stopped pacing and turned to face me. He looked exhausted, his scrubs wrinkled and his eyes shadowed with fatigue. But it was the expression on his face that sent a chill racing down my spine, a mixture of pity and dread that made my stomach churn. You're Mr. Carter? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, nodding furiously. Where are they? Are they okay? He hesitated, glancing toward the double doors leading deeper into the ER. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. You can't see them yet, he murmured. My blood ran cold. Why not? I demanded, my voice rising. What's going on? Are they hurt? Tell me. The doctor lowered his gaze, refusing to meet my eyes. When he finally spoke, his words hit me like a freight train. The police will explain everything once they arrive, he whispered. I'm sorry, but until then, we can't let you see them. The doctor's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I stood there frozen, staring at him as if willing him to take it all back, to tell me this was some kind of cruel joke. But he didn't flinch, didn't offer any reassurance. Instead, he stepped aside and nodded toward a row of plastic chairs near the wall. Please wait here, he said softly. Someone will be out shortly. I wanted to scream, to demand answers right then and there. Who did he think he was, keeping me away from my family? But something about his demeanor stopped me, a heavy sadness that seemed almost guilty. Whatever had happened, it wasn't just bad news. It was worse than that. So I sat down, gripping the edge of the chair so tightly my fingers ached. The waiting room felt eerily quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights above the only sound breaking the silence. Every tick of the clock on the far wall felt like an eternity. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Had they been in a car accident? Was someone drunk driving? Or was it something else entirely, something I couldn't even imagine? After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the double doors swung open again. 2 police officers walked in, their uniforms crisp but their expressions grim. One of them was Officer Daniels, the man who'd called me earlier. He gave me a curt nod before pulling up a chair across from me. Mr. Carter, he began, his voice low and measured. We need to ask you a few questions about tonight. Do you feel up to talking? I nodded numbly, though my throat felt like sandpaper. Just tell me what happened, I rasped. Please. Daniels exchanged a glance with his partner, a younger woman whose badge read Officer Reyes. She pulled out a notepad and clicked her pen, ready to take notes. Then Daniels leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Your wife, your brother, and your son were found unconscious in a vehicle outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, he explained slowly. Paramedics responded to an anonymous tip around 11 p.m. They're stable now, but... He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. My stomach churned. But what? I pressed, my voice cracking. What aren't you telling me? Reyes spoke up this time, her tone softer but no less grave. There were signs of foul play, Mr. Carter. Evidence suggests they may have been drugged. And, she hesitated, glancing at Daniels before continuing. There's reason to believe your wife and brother might have been involved in something illegal. My head swam. Illegal? Sarah. Ethan. That didn't make sense. Sarah was the most honest person I knew. She volunteered at church, baked cookies for school fundraisers, kissed me goodbye every morning before work. And Ethan, sure, we didn't always see eye to eye, but he'd never been into anything shady. At least, not that I knew of. What do you mean illegal? I asked, my voice rising despite myself. What evidence are you talking about? Daniel sighed, clearly uncomfortable. We found traces of narcotics in the vehicle, along with cash and documents suggesting, well, transactions related to drug trafficking. I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. Drug trafficking? Sarah? Ethan? No. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of misunderstanding. You're wrong, I said firmly, shaking my head. You've got the wrong people. My wife would never. We understand this is difficult to hear, Reyes interrupted gently. But we also found text messages on both their phones indicating they'd been meeting secretly over the past several months, planning something big. No, I whispered, more to myself than to them. This can't be real. It was like the floor had dropped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my life suddenly felt like a lie. How could Sarah betray me like this? How could Ethan? And Jake, my sweet, innocent little boy, what was he doing mixed up in whatever nightmare they dragged him into? Daniels cleared his throat, snapping me out of my spiraling thoughts. We'll need to ask you some questions about their recent behavior. Anything unusual you've noticed, changes in routine, strange phone calls, anything like that. I wanted to laugh bitterly. Unusual behavior? Where do I even start? Sarah had been distant lately, distracted. Ethan had been visiting more often than usual, always making excuses to stay late. And Jake had started having trouble sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night crying for no reason. I chalked it all up to stress, to normal family stuff. Never once had I suspected. I don't know, I admitted finally, my voice barely audible. I didn't notice anything. Daniels nodded sympathetically. We'll do everything we can to get to the bottom of this, Mr. Carter. In the meantime, try to stay strong, for your son's sake. For my son's sake. Those words hit harder than anything else. Because no matter what Sarah or Ethan had done, Jake was still my boy. Still the bright, beautiful light in my life. If anything happened to him. I couldn't finish the thought. Can I see him yet? I asked hoarsely. Just Jake. Daniels glanced at Reyes, then back at me. Not yet, he said regretfully. But soon. We promise. As they stood to leave, I slumped back in my chair, overwhelmed by a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, betrayal, fear. None of it made sense. None of it felt real. And yet, here I was. The hours dragged on like molasses, each tick of the clock weighing heavier than the last. I stayed glued to that plastic chair, staring at the double doors as if sheer willpower could force them open and bring answers rushing toward me. But nothing happened. No doctors emerged. No updates came. Just silence, crushing, suffocating silence. At some point, a nurse brought me a cup of coffee. It's going to be okay, she said softly, placing it in front of me. Her words felt hollow, rehearsed, like something people say when they don't know what else to offer. I nodded anyway, too drained to argue or explain how far from okay things really were. When Officer Daniels returned, he didn't come alone. This time, he was accompanied by a detective, a tall man with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to bore straight through me. His badge read Detective Harris, and his presence filled the room with an unspoken weight. Mr. Carter, Harris began without preamble, pulling up a chair across from me. We've made some progress. I need you to listen carefully. I sat up straighter, gripping the armrests of my chair. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Tell me, I rasped, my voice raw from hours of suppressed panic. Harris opened a folder on his lap, flipping through pages of notes and photos. He paused on one photo, a grainy image of Sarah and Ethan standing near a van outside the abandoned warehouse. They looked casual, almost relaxed, like they weren't worried about being caught. Like this was normal. We traced the anonymous tip back to an old burner phone registered under a fake name, he explained. Whoever called us knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted your family found, but not before certain evidence was already in place. What kind of evidence? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. He hesitated, then pulled out another photo. It showed a duffel bag stuffed with cash and small packets of white powder. Drugs. So much money. My stomach churned again, bile rising in my throat. This was inside the vehicle, Harris continued. And forensics confirmed traces of the same substance in all 3 of their systems. Your wife and brother appear to have been using regularly for months. Your son, he trailed off, his expression softening slightly. Your son tested positive for exposure, but not usage. We believe he may have been given something unintentionally, or perhaps as leverage. Leverage? Against who? Against me? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing over me. Jake was only 8 years old. 8. Too young to understand any of this, let alone be dragged into it. And the documents? I asked hoarsely, remembering what Reyes had mentioned earlier. Harris flipped to another page in the folder, revealing photocopies of handwritten notes and receipts. They're ledgers, he said grimly. Detailed records of transactions, dates, locations. It looks like your wife and brother were involved in distributing narcotics locally. From what we can tell, they'd been operating under the radar for quite some time. My mind reeled. Sarah, the woman I'd promised to love and protect forever, wasn't just cheating on our marriage vows, she was risking everything we had. Our home. Our future. Our son's life. And Ethan. Ethan, who I'd grown up with, shared secrets with, fought alongside during tough times. He'd betrayed me too. Betrayed Jake. I don't understand, I whispered, shaking my head. Why would they do this? Why would they risk everything, for drugs? Harris leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. Sometimes people get desperate, he said. Or greedy. Or both. Without hearing their side of the story, it's hard to say for sure. But one thing is clear. Whoever tipped us off wanted this operation shut down, and fast. I thought about that for a moment, the pieces slowly clicking into place. Someone had set them up. Someone had deliberately exposed them, not to help them, but to destroy them. And now, thanks to their choices, Jake was caught in the crossfire. Can I see him yet? I asked again, my voice breaking. Please. I need to see my son. Harris exchanged a glance with Daniels, then nodded reluctantly. Just for a few minutes, he said. He's still sedated, but the doctors think it's safe for you to go in briefly. They led me down a long hallway lined with sterile white walls and fluorescent lights. Each step felt heavier than the last, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. When we finally reached Jake's room, I froze in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. There he was, my little boy, lying motionless on the hospital bed, tiny tubes snaking around his arms and face. Machines beeped steadily beside him, monitoring his heartbeat and oxygen levels. For the first time since getting that call, I allowed myself to cry. I approached the bed cautiously, afraid to touch him, as if he might shatter under my hands. But when I finally brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, he stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering open. Dad, he murmured, his voice barely audible. I'm here, buddy, I choked out, clutching his hand tightly. I'm right here. His eyes widened, filling with tears. Where's Mom? Is she okay? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I explain this to him? How could I tell him the truth without breaking him even further? She's resting, I lied, forcing a weak smile. But she'll be fine. You're gonna be fine too, okay? Daddy's got you. Jake nodded sleepily, his grip on my hand loosening as he drifted back into unconsciousness. I stayed there for as long as they'd let me, watching him breathe, praying he wouldn't remember any of this once he woke up again. When the nurses finally ushered me out, I returned to the waiting room feeling emptier than ever. Whatever happened next, whether Sarah and Ethan faced charges, whether our lives could ever return to normal, it didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was Jake. Protecting him. Saving him. Because no matter what truths came to light, one thing was certain. My family would never be the same again. By morning, the hospital waiting room had transformed from a quiet purgatory into something resembling a crime scene. Reporters lingered outside, cameras flashing like strobe lights as they tried to catch a glimpse of anyone connected to the case. Uniformed officers filtered in and out, their boots echoing ominously against the tile floor. Detective Harris stayed close by, occasionally disappearing behind closed doors for hushed conversations that I wasn't privy to. I sat there numbly, staring at my hands that felt useless now, incapable of fixing anything. My wife and brother were still unconscious, though the doctors assured me they'd wake soon. Jake remained stable, but fragile. And I was stuck here, suspended between anger, grief, and disbelief, unable to do anything except wait. When Sarah finally regained consciousness, I wasn't allowed to see her immediately. Instead, Harris escorted me to a small conference room down the hall, where he explained what would happen next. Your wife is being questioned about her involvement, he said bluntly, leaning against the table. Same goes for your brother once he wakes up. Depending on what they say, and the evidence we've already gathered, they could both face serious charges. Serious charges. I repeated hollowly. What does that mean? Jail time? Harris nodded grimly. Possibly. Distribution of narcotics is no small offense, especially when minors are involved. Even if your son wasn't directly implicated, his presence complicates things significantly. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Jail. For Sarah. For Ethan. People I'd trusted, loved, even depended on. How had it come to this? Had they been planning this double life for months, years even, while I blindly went about my routine, oblivious to everything? I need to talk to her, I said suddenly, standing up. I need to hear it from her. Harris held up a hand, stopping me mid-step. Not yet, he said firmly. Right now, she's under investigation. Anything you say, or don't say, could impact the case. If you want to help her, let us handle this professionally. Professionally. As if any of this could be handled cleanly, neatly wrapped up like some procedural drama. This wasn't TV, this was my life. My family. My son. But Harris was right, I couldn't afford to make things worse. So I sank back into my chair, defeated, and waited for updates. It wasn't until late afternoon that I finally got to see Sarah. She was sitting upright in her hospital bed, pale and disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. When she saw me walk in, her expression crumpled instantly. James, she whispered, reaching out weakly. Oh God, James, I'm so sorry. Sorry. That single word carried the weight of everything unsaid, every betrayal, every shattered dream. But it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. What were you thinking? I demanded, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. Drugs? Trafficking? Putting Jake in danger? Were you even thinking at all? She flinched, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she sobbed. We needed money, James. Things were falling apart, the bills, the mortgage, everything. Ethan said he knew someone who could help us get ahead. Just one deal, he promised. One big score, and then we'd be done. One deal. I spat bitterly. And how many deals later did you end up here? With our son overdosed in the next room? Her shoulders shook violently, her cries muffled by trembling hands pressed over her mouth. I never meant for Jake to get hurt, she choked out. Never. He was just supposed to stay with a babysitter that night. But Ethan said. She trailed off, unable to finish. Ethan said what? I snapped, my patience fraying completely. That dragging an 8-year-old into your criminal empire was a good idea. No, she cried, shaking her head desperately. He said it would look suspicious if we left him alone. That whoever tipped off the police might suspect something if we didn't act normal. I swear, James, I didn't know what else to do. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the woman I'd married. This stranger who had gambled away our lives, our safety, for a quick fix to financial woes. It made no sense. None of it made sense. And Ethan? I asked coldly. What about him? Was he in on this too? Or was he just using you? Sarah hesitated, guilt flickering across her face. He started it, she admitted quietly. But I went along with it. I thought maybe we could save ourselves. Save yourselves? At what cost? By destroying everything we had built together? I don't recognize you anymore, I said finally, my voice breaking. You're not the person I married. And neither is Ethan. Before she could respond, Harris appeared in the doorway, signaling that my time was up. Reluctantly, I turned and walked away, leaving Sarah sobbing alone in her hospital bed. As I returned to the waiting room, my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What would happen to Sarah and Ethan? Would they go to jail? Could I forgive them, if forgiveness was even possible? And most importantly, what would become of Jake? Detective Harris found me a short while later, looking unusually somber. We've identified the person who tipped us off, he said quietly. It's someone close to your family. Someone who knew exactly what buttons to push. Who? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Harris hesitated, then handed me a photo. It was grainy, taken from surveillance footage, but the figure standing near the van outside the warehouse was unmistakable. My mother-in-law. The photo trembled in my hands as I stared at it, unable to process what I was seeing. My mother-in-law, Sarah's mom, Helen, the woman who baked cookies with Jake every Christmas and sent us birthday cards filled with cash, was the one who had tipped off the police? It didn't make sense. Why would she do this? Was it out of concern for Jake? Or was there something else driving her? Are you sure about this? I asked Harris, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would she call you anonymously instead of coming to me or Sarah directly? Harris leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. That's the question we are trying to answer, he admitted. But based on preliminary interviews, it seemed she'd suspected something was wrong for a while. She claimed she tried talking to Sarah privately, urging her to stop whatever she was involved in, but Sarah refused to listen. So she turned them in, I said flatly, still struggling to wrap my head around it. She sold out her own daughter. It's not that simple, Harris replied carefully. From what we've gathered, your mother-in-law believed drastic measures were necessary to protect Jake. She says she feared things would escalate if left unchecked, and judging by last night's events, she may have been right. I sank back into the chair, gripping the edge of the seat so tightly my knuckles turned white. This whole situation was spiraling further out of control than I ever could have imagined. Every revelation peeled back another layer of lies, exposing cracks in the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family. Later that evening, I found myself sitting in Jake's hospital room again, watching him sleep. His breathing was steady now, less labored than before. The doctors assured me he'd recover physically, but I couldn't shake the fear gnawing at me. How much damage had already been done emotionally? Would he ever trust me, or anyone, to keep him safe again? As I sat there lost in thought, Detective Harris appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Mind stepping out for a moment? He asked quietly. There's someone here who wants to speak with you. Curious, I followed him down the hall to a small lounge area near the cafeteria. Sitting at one of the tables was Helen, her face pale and drawn, her eyes rimmed with dark circles. She looked smaller somehow, frailer, like the weight of her actions had crushed her spirit. James, she said softly, standing as I approached. Her voice cracked with emotion. I owe you an explanation. You think? I snapped, anger bubbling to the surface despite my exhaustion. You called the cops on your own daughter. Your grandson ended up drugged and unconscious because of whatever mess they were in. And now you show up here expecting forgiveness? I didn't know it would go this far, she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. I swear, James, all I wanted was to protect Jake. When I realized what Sarah and Ethan were doing, how deep they'd gotten, I panicked. I didn't know who else to turn to. But why not tell me? I demanded, my voice rising. Why keep me in the dark? Because I was afraid you'd try to cover for them, she shot back, surprising me with the force of her words. You've always been loyal to a fault, James. Even when loyalty doesn't serve you. I knew if I told you, you'd give them a chance to explain themselves, to lie their way out of it. And by then, it might have been too late. Her words stung, not just because they were true, but because they highlighted how blind I'd been. How willingly I'd ignored the signs, excused the changes in Sarah's behavior, dismissed Ethan's increasingly frequent visits as coincidence. All because I trusted them. Trusted them to be honest. To care about Jake as much as I did. And now look where we are, I muttered bitterly, sinking into a chair across from her. My son almost died. My wife and brother might go to prison. And you played judge, jury, and executioner without even consulting me. I'm sorry, she whispered, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her guilt. I never meant for any of this to happen. I only wanted to save Jake. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You saved him from them. Now what? Who's going to save him from the fallout? From losing his parents, or worse, growing up thinking this is normal? Helen flinched, unable to meet my gaze. For the first time, I saw the toll this had taken on her too. Whatever her intentions, she hadn't come out of this unscathed either. After our conversation, I returned to Jake's room feeling more conflicted than ever. Part of me wanted to lash out, to blame everyone, including myself, for letting things spiral so far out of control. But another part of me recognized that assigning blame wouldn't fix anything. Not really. What mattered now was Jake. Keeping him safe. Giving him a future untainted by the chaos surrounding us. Whether that meant cutting ties with Sarah and Ethan entirely remained to be seen, but one thing was clear, the life we'd built together was over. As I sat beside Jake, holding his tiny hand in mine, I made a silent promise to him. No matter what happened next, no matter how broken I felt, I would do everything in my power to shield him from the wreckage. Because he deserved better. Better than the family we'd become. Better than the choices we'd made. And maybe, just maybe, starting over wasn't such a bad idea after all. It had been 3 days since the nightmare began, and though Jake was slowly recovering, nothing else felt stable. Sarah and Ethan remained under police custody, their fates hanging in limbo as investigators pieced together the full scope of their involvement. Detective Harris stopped by daily with updates, but each new revelation only deepened my anger and confusion. That morning, however, something changed. As I sat in the hospital cafeteria sipping coffee that tasted like ash, Harris approached me looking unusually tense. His jaw was clenched, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, a stark contrast to his usual calm demeanor. Mr. Carter, he said, pulling out a chair across from me. We need to talk. I braced myself for yet another gut punch. What now? I asked wearily. More bad news. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Not exactly. But it's complicated. Complicated how? I pressed, leaning forward. My heart was already racing, anticipating whatever fresh hell awaited me. Harris sighed heavily and placed a folder on the table between us. Inside were several documents, emails, bank statements, and even surveillance photos I hadn't seen before. One image caught my eye immediately, a grainy photo of Ethan meeting with a man I didn't recognize outside a seedy-looking bar. This man, Harris said, pointing to the stranger in the photo, is Victor Kane. He's a known associate of an organized crime syndicate operating in the region. We believe he recruited your brother, and possibly your wife, into their operation. My stomach dropped. Organized crime. This wasn't just some small-time drug ring anymore. It was bigger, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. But here's where things get tricky, Harris continued, flipping to another page in the folder. It showed a series of text messages exchanged between Victor Kane and someone using Sarah's phone. The messages were coded, filled with cryptic references to packages and deliveries. What does this have to do with me? I asked, dread pooling in my chest. Harris locked eyes with me, his expression grim. Victor Kane isn't happy about what happened last week. Your family disrupted his operation, and is not the kind of guy who lets things slide. Earlier today, we intercepted a call suggesting he's planning retaliation. Retaliation? I echoed, my voice trembling. Against who? Against us? Harris nodded solemnly. Against anyone connected to your wife and brother, including you and Jake. The room spun. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All this time, I'd been consumed with anger and betrayal, focused solely on Sarah and Ethan's actions. I hadn't considered the ripple effects, the enemies they might have made along the way. Enemies who wouldn't hesitate to hurt innocent people. We've increased security at the hospital, Harris assured me quickly, sensing my panic. And we are working on getting protective custody for you and Jake once he's discharged. But until then, you need to stay vigilant. Vigilant. The word echoed in my mind, hollow and meaningless. How could I protect my son when I couldn't even trust my own family? Later that evening, after Harris left, I returned to Jake's room feeling numb. Every shadow seemed menacing, every sound suspicious. Even the nurse's soft footsteps down the hallway set my nerves on edge. I pulled the chair closer to Jake's bed, keeping one hand firmly on his shoulder as if physical proximity alone could shield him from harm. Around midnight, just as exhaustion began to overtake me, I heard a faint knock at the door. Thinking it was another nurse checking in, I called out, "Come in." But it wasn't a nurse. Ethan stood in the doorway, pale and disheveled, his clothes rumpled and his face bruised. His wrists bore faint marks from handcuffs, and his eyes darted nervously around the room like a cornered animal. "James," he whispered hoarsely, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." For a split second, I thought about calling for security, about yelling for help. But something in his voice stopped me. Something desperate. Broken. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, standing up. "You're supposed to be in custody." "They let me go temporarily," he admitted, stepping closer cautiously. "I told them I needed to see you. To warn you." "Warn me about what?" I snapped, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "About Victor Kane? About the mess you and Sarah dragged us into?" "Yes," he said urgently, his tone pleading. "But it's worse than you think. Much worse." I crossed my arms, glaring at him. "Worse than nearly killing my son? Worse than ruining our lives?" Ethan flinched but didn't back down. "Sarah didn't tell you everything," he said quietly. "She didn't want you to know because she knew you'd never forgive her." "Forgive her for what?" I spat, my patience fraying completely. What else could she possibly have done? "She wasn't working for Victor Kane," Ethan blurted out, his voice cracking under the weight of the confession. "She was working against him." The words hit me like a freight train, knocking the wind out of me. Against him? What did that mean? Before I could ask, Ethan continued, his voice trembling with urgency. "Months ago, Sarah stumbled onto evidence linking Kane to human trafficking," he explained. "Kids, James. They were smuggling kids across state lines. She wanted to expose him, but she couldn't do it alone. So she convinced me to help her gather proof. That's why we were meeting secretly. Why we kept records, ledgers, transactions, everything." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. Human trafficking? Evidence? None of this aligned with the picture Harris had painted, or the lies Sarah herself had told. And Jake? I asked sharply, my voice breaking. Why was he there? He wasn't supposed to be. Ethan insisted, running a shaky hand through his hair. Kane found out about us somehow. He must have tipped off the police anonymously to flush us out. When Sarah realized they were onto us, she panicked and brought Jake along to keep him close. She thought it would look less suspicious. Less suspicious. As if any of this could be justified. As if dragging an 8-year-old into a war zone was remotely excusable. So what happens now? I demanded bitterly. Are you expecting me to thank you? To believe this sob story? No, Ethan said, shaking his head. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. And because if anything happens to Sarah or me, you'll need to finish what we started. For Jake's sake. Before I could respond, the door burst open, and 2 uniformed officers rushed in, grabbing Ethan roughly by the arms. "Time's up," one of them barked, dragging him toward the door. Ethan twisted around, his eyes locking onto mine one last time. "Trust no one," he warned, his voice barely audible. "Not even Harris." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with Jake, and 1,000 unanswered questions. The words echoed in my mind long after Ethan was dragged away. Trust no one. Not even Harris. What did that mean? Was Harris involved somehow? Or was Ethan just trying to rattle me, planting seeds of doubt to buy himself time? I didn't know what, or who, to believe anymore. The line between truth and lies had blurred so completely that every revelation felt like a potential trap. Jake stirred in his sleep, pulling me back to the present. His tiny hand twitched slightly, brushing against mine. For a moment, I allowed myself to focus solely on him, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the faint warmth radiating from his skin. He was alive. Safe, for now. And that was all that mattered. But how long would it last? If Victor Kane really was coming for us, if Sarah and Ethan had stumbled into something far bigger than they could handle, then Jake's life was still in danger. My son deserved better than this, a childhood free from fear, free from violence. Yet here we were, caught in the crossfire of a battle I barely understood. Later that night, Detective Harris returned, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an edge of urgency. "We've received credible intel suggesting Kane's men are planning to move soon," he said without preamble, closing the door behind him. "They're targeting your family directly." I nodded stiffly, pretending to absorb the information while silently replaying Ethan's warning in my head. Trust no one. Could I afford to take Harris at face value? Or was he part of whatever web Sarah and Ethan had tangled themselves in? And what exactly are you doing about it? I asked cautiously, studying his expression for any sign of deceit. "We are relocating you and Jake to a safe house," Harris replied, pulling out a folded map from his jacket pocket. "Somewhere off-grid where Kane won't find you. It's temporary, just until we can dismantle his operation and ensure your safety." A safe house. The idea sounded almost too good to be true. A chance to escape the chaos, to protect Jake from whatever storm was brewing. But something about Harris's tone made my stomach churn. Too rehearsed. Too polished. And Sarah? I asked, testing him. "What happens to her?" Harris hesitated, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. "She'll remain in custody until we determine her level of involvement. Same goes for your brother." I nodded again, though unease prickled at the back of my neck. Their fates were secondary now. Jake came first. Always. "When do we leave?" I asked finally, forcing myself to sound cooperative. "Tonight," Harris said firmly. "An unmarked vehicle will pick you up within the hour. Pack only essentials. The fewer people who know where you're going, the safer you'll be." As Harris exited the room, I turned to Jake, my mind racing. Something about this plan didn't sit right with me. Why the rush? Why tonight? And why hadn't Harris mentioned anything about Sarah's claims, or Ethan's cryptic warning? I glanced at the clock on the wall, 11:47 p.m., less than 15 minutes before the car arrived. There wasn't much time to think, let alone act. But as I packed a small bag for Jake, I couldn't shake the feeling that trusting Harris blindly might cost us everything. Then it hit me, the phone call. The anonymous tip that led police straight to Sarah, Ethan, and Jake. What if Harris had been wrong about its origin? What if it hadn't come from Helen, or even Victor Kane, but from someone else entirely? Someone closer to the investigation? Before I could second-guess myself further, I pulled out my own phone and scrolled through recent calls. Finding Harris's number, I opened the dialer and pressed it, holding the device close to my ear. But instead of ringing, the screen flashed a message, "Call blocked." My blood ran cold. Harris had disabled his phone, or instructed someone else to do so. Whatever was happening, he didn't want interruptions. By the time the unmarked car pulled up outside the hospital, I'd made my decision. Slipping Jake's jacket over his shoulders, I carried him carefully toward the waiting vehicle. The driver, a plainclothes officer I didn't recognize, greeted me with a curt nod. "This way, Mr. Carter," he said, opening the rear door. I hesitated, glancing around the dimly lit parking lot. Something felt off. The air was too quiet, the shadows too deep, and the driver's eyes, cold, calculating, didn't match the reassuring tone of his voice. "Where's Detective Harris?" I asked suddenly, clutching Jake tighter. "He's coordinating logistics," the driver replied smoothly. "You'll meet him at the safe house." Liar. The words screamed in my head, loud and undeniable. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a setup. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I stepped backward, keeping Jake cradled protectively in my arms. "I changed my mind," I said firmly. "We are staying here." The driver's smile faltered, his patience visibly fraying. "Sir, please get in the car," he insisted, taking a step closer. "For your son's sake." "No," I shot back, backing away further. "If you're legit, you'll understand why I don't trust you." For a split second, panic flickered across his face. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, reaching for Jake. Instinct kicked in. I pivoted sharply, shoving past him and bolting toward the hospital entrance. "Help!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty corridors. "Somebody help me!" Security guards appeared moments later, intercepting the driver before he could follow. As they restrained him, I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath, Jake still clutched tightly in my arms. "What's going on?" one of the guards demanded, glaring at the fake officer. "He tried to kidnap my son," I rasped, shaking uncontrollably. "Call the police. Now." When Detective Harris arrived 20 minutes later, flanked by uniformed officers, he looked genuinely shocked to see me standing there, with the imposter in handcuffs beside me. "James," he began, his voice laced with concern. "What happened?" I stared at him, searching his face for answers. Was he truly innocent, or was this all part of some larger game? Either way, I knew one thing for certain. We weren't safe, not yet. And until I uncovered the full truth, I couldn't trust anyone, not even the man who. Detective Harris paced back and forth in front of me, his brow furrowed as he interrogated the fake officer, now identified as a man named Carl Mayers, a low-level enforcer with ties to Victor Kane's syndicate. The revelation sent another wave of nausea crashing over me. Kane had infiltrated the police force, or at least found a way to exploit it. How far did this corruption reach? And how many others were involved? "I swear I didn't know," Harris said finally, turning to face me. His voice was strained, his usual composure fractured. "If I'd suspected anything like this." "But you didn't," I interrupted coldly, clutching Jake tighter against my chest. "And neither did I. That's the problem, isn't it? We've been operating blind this whole time." Harris flinched but didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number, speaking quickly and quietly into the receiver. When he hung up, he turned back to me with a grim expression. "We are escalating security measures," he explained. "Jake and you will be moved under armed escort to a federal safe house. No one outside a select team of agents will know your location." "And Sarah?" I asked, my voice sharp. "What about Ethan?" "They'll stay where they are, for now," Harris replied cautiously. "But I'll make sure they're monitored closely. If Kane thinks they're still useful to him, he might try to use them against you." Useful? The word sent a chill down my spine. Was that why Sarah had dragged us all into this mess in the first place? To protect herself, or worse, to manipulate me into helping her expose Kane's operation? I wanted to believe Ethan's story, that Sarah had been working against Kane, gathering evidence to save innocent lives. But every new twist made it harder to separate fact from fiction. Who was telling the truth? And how could I possibly figure it out before someone else got hurt? Hours later, we were whisked away in an unmarked armored vehicle, flanked by 2 SUVs filled with armed guards. Jake slept soundly in my lap, oblivious to the chaos surrounding us. For that, I was grateful. He didn't need to carry the weight of this nightmare, not yet. The safe house turned out to be a secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods, miles away from any major roads or towns. It was rustic but functional, stocked with enough supplies to last weeks. A single agent remained behind to guard us, a stern-faced woman named Agent Morales, who introduced herself with clipped efficiency. "You'll stay here until further notice," she instructed, checking the perimeter for potential threats. "No phones, no internet, no contact with anyone outside this facility." "Understood." I nodded reluctantly, though the isolation gnawed at me. Without communication, without access to information, how could I ensure Jake's safety, or mine? What if Kane found us anyway? What if Morales herself was compromised? As night fell, I sat by the window, staring out at the dense forest beyond. Shadows danced across the trees, each movement triggering a fresh surge of paranoia. Every creak of the wooden floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, felt like a threat lurking just out of sight. Sometime after midnight, Jake woke up crying, startled by a loud crash outside. I rushed to his side, soothing him with quiet words and gentle strokes along his back. But as I held him close, trying to calm his trembling body, I realized something was wrong. The lights flickered. "Stay here," I whispered urgently, setting Jake down on the couch and grabbing the baseball but Agent Morales had left leaning against the wall. My heart pounded as I crept toward the source of the noise, a shattered window in the kitchen, glass shards scattered across the floor. Someone, or something, had broken in. Before I could react, footsteps echoed from the hallway behind me. I spun around, raising the bat defensively, only to find Agent Morales standing there with a flashlight in hand. "It's okay," she said quickly, holding up her hands. "Just a raccoon. It must have knocked over the trash can." Relief washed over me, but only briefly. Something about her explanation didn't add up. Why would a raccoon break a window? And why hadn't she checked the perimeter earlier, when the sound first occurred? I thought you said this place was secure, I snapped, lowering the bat slightly but keeping it within reach. It is, Morales replied evenly, though her eyes darted nervously toward the broken window. But nothing's foolproof. Especially out here. Her tone was too casual, too rehearsed. My instinct screamed at me to press further, to demand answers, but before I could, Jake called out from the living room, his voice trembling with fear. Daddy. I hesitated, torn between protecting my son and confronting Morales. In the end, Jake came first. Lowering the bat completely, I returned to his side, wrapping him in a tight embrace. It's okay, buddy, I murmured, kissing the top of his head. Daddy's got you. But as I glanced over my shoulder at Morales, still standing silently in the doorway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By morning, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Morales avoided eye contact, retreating to her post near the front door as if guarding against some unseen enemy. Meanwhile, I busied myself making breakfast for Jake, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy despite the storm brewing inside me. Then, just as I was finishing up, the radio crackled to life, a harsh burst of static followed by a distorted voice. James Carter. You can't run forever. Bring the boy to me, and I'll let your wife live. The message ended abruptly, leaving only silence in its wake. Jake looked up at me, wide-eyed and confused. Who was that, Daddy? I swallowed hard, forcing a weak smile. Nobody important, buddy. Just interference. But deep down, I knew better. Victor Kane had found us, or at least, he knew where to start looking. And unless I figured out who to trust, and fast, we wouldn't survive this game much longer. The radio message echoed in my mind long after it ended, each word slicing through me like a knife. Bring the boy to me, and I'll let your wife live. Kane wasn't bluffing. He knew exactly how to manipulate me, how to twist my weaknesses into weapons. Sarah, no matter what she'd done, no matter how much she'd lied, was still Jake's mother. And if sacrificing her meant saving my son, I didn't know if I could make that choice. But Kane wasn't just threatening Sarah, he was targeting Jake too. Why? What made him so valuable? Was it because of Sarah's investigation? Or was there something else, something I hadn't uncovered yet? Agent Morales reappeared moments later, her face pale but composed. What did you hear? She asked sharply, grabbing the radio and examining it closely. I hesitated, debating whether to tell her the truth. Could I trust her? Or was she another pawn in Kane's game? It was Kane, I admitted finally, watching her carefully for any sign of deception. He wants Jake. In exchange for Sarah. Morales froze, her fingers tightening around the radio. For a split second, I thought I saw fear flicker across her face, but then it was gone, replaced by steely determination. We need to move again, she said firmly, already heading toward the door. This location's been compromised. Compromised how? I demanded, following her. And why should I believe you're not working for him? She stopped abruptly, turning to face me with an intensity that startled me. Because I've lost people to Kane too, she snapped, her voice trembling slightly. My partner. My brother. Both murdered because they got too close to exposing his operation. I'm here to stop him, not help him. Her words hit me hard. Pain. Grief. Vengeance. They were emotions I understood all too well. Maybe Morales really was on our side. Or maybe she was just a better liar than the rest. Either way, we didn't have time to argue. Not with Kane closing in. Within minutes, we were packed and ready to leave. Jake clung to me silently, his small hands gripping my shirt like a lifeline. I tried to reassure him, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. It's okay, buddy. We are going somewhere safe. But even as I spoke, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt gnawing at me. Safe houses. Armored vehicles. Armed guards. None of it had worked so far. How could I possibly protect Jake when every step forward seemed to lead us deeper into danger? As we stepped outside, the morning air bit sharply against my skin, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Morales scanned the perimeter cautiously, her gun drawn and ready. The forest stretched endlessly around us, silent and foreboding. Then I heard it, a distant hum, growing louder with each passing second. A helicopter. My stomach dropped. If Kane had sent a chopper, it meant he wasn't playing games anymore. He wanted us found, and fast. Get down. Morales shouted, yanking me and Jake behind a cluster of trees just as the chopper roared overhead, its blades slicing through the crisp air. Through the foliage, I caught glimpses of men rappelling down ropes, their faces obscured by tactical gear. They're here, I whispered hoarsely, clutching Jake tighter. What do we do now? Morales didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number, speaking quickly and urgently under her breath. When she hung up, her expression was grim. There's a secondary extraction point 2 miles east of here, she explained. We'll have to move on foot. Stick close and stay low. If they spot us. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. If Kane's men caught us, none of us would make it out alive. The next hour passed in a blur of adrenaline and terror. We moved through the dense woods as quietly as possible, weaving between trees and ducking beneath branches. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, felt like a death knell. Jake stumbled several times, his tiny legs struggling to keep pace, but I carried him whenever necessary, ignoring the burn in my arms and the ache in my chest. At one point, gunfire erupted behind us, a sharp, staccato burst that sent birds scattering from the treetops. Morales returned fire instinctively, her movements precise and calculated. But even she couldn't hold them off forever. "We are running out of time," she muttered, reloading her weapon. "Keep moving." Finally, we reached the extraction point, a narrow clearing surrounded by towering pines. A black SUV waited there, its engine idling softly. Behind the wheel sat a familiar figure, Detective Harris. For a moment, relief washed over me. Harris was here. Help had arrived. But then I noticed the look on his face, a mixture of guilt and resignation that sent a fresh wave of dread crashing over me. "What's going on?" I demanded, stepping back protectively as Morales approached the vehicle cautiously. Harris sighed heavily, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "James, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I tried to keep you safe, but Kane's reach is wider than we thought. Someone leaked your location." "Who?" I spat, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Was it you?" "No," he insisted, holding up his hands defensively. "But I can't guarantee anyone else's loyalty, not even mine. That's why you need to disappear. Completely. Disappear." The word hung in the air like a death sentence, vanishing without a trace, leaving behind everything I'd ever known. It was the only way to ensure Jake's safety, but at what cost? To never see Sarah again? To abandon Ethan? To sever all ties to the life we once had? Before I could respond, Morales interrupted, her tone urgent. "We don't have time for this. Get in the car, now." Reluctantly, I obeyed, sliding into the backseat with Jake still cradled in my arms. As Harris sped away, I glanced back at the forest, watching as shadows emerged from the trees, Kane's men, closing in. Hours later, we arrived at a remote airstrip, where a small private plane awaited us. Harris handed me a new identity packet, fake passports, birth certificates, driver's licenses, all meticulously crafted to erase any trace of who we were. "This is your chance to start over," he said solemnly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Take care of your son, James. Don't let Kane win." I nodded numbly, though my heart felt heavy with grief and uncertainty. Starting over sounded simple enough in theory, but living a lie. Raising Jake in a world built on deception? Could I really do that? As the plane ascended into the sky, I held Jake close, staring out the window at the shrinking landscape below. Somewhere down there, Sarah and Ethan were fighting their own battles. Fighting, or dying, for reasons I still didn't fully understand. One thing was certain, Victor Kane wasn't done with us. And until I found a way to take him down, for good, none of us would truly be free. The plane touched down on a secluded airstrip nestled deep within the mountains of Canada, a place so remote it felt like the edge of the world. Harris had arranged for us to stay in a small cabin owned by a trusted contact, far removed from Kane's reach. For weeks, we lived quietly, blending into the rugged wilderness as if we'd always belonged there. But peace never lasts, not when you're running from monsters. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, I sat outside with Jake, teaching him how to skip stones across the surface of a nearby lake. His laughter echoed through the stillness, a sound both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful because it reminded me of the life we used to have. Heartbreaking because I knew this fragile moment couldn't last forever. "Daddy," Jake asked suddenly, tossing another stone into the water, "are we ever going home?" I froze, the question hitting me like a punch to the gut. How could I explain to him that home no longer existed? That the people we loved, Sarah, Ethan, even Helen, were either lost or unreachable? That our old lives had been erased, replaced by shadows and secrets? "We'll make a new home here," I said finally, forcing a weak smile. "Together." He nodded thoughtfully, seemingly satisfied with my answer, for now. But I knew the questions would come again. They always did. Later that night, as Jake slept soundly in the loft above the main room, I sat by the fire, staring at the flames as they danced and crackled. My mind raced with unanswered questions. What had Sarah truly been fighting for? Why had she risked everything, including Jake's life, to expose Kane? And most importantly, why had Kane targeted us specifically? Then, just as exhaustion began to overtake me, a knock sounded at the door. My heart stopped. No one was supposed to know we were here. Harris had promised secrecy. Yet someone, or something, was standing on the other side of that door. Gripping the baseball bat I kept nearby, I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was Sarah. She looked gaunt, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Her clothes were torn and dirty, as if she'd walked miles through the wilderness to find us. But despite her disheveled appearance, she was alive, and alone. "James," she whispered hoarsely, her voice breaking. "Please, let me in." For a moment, I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door shut, to protect Jake from whatever danger she might bring. But then I remembered the promise I'd made, to shield him, yes, but also to uncover the truth. And Sarah held the key to unlocking it. Slowly, reluctantly, I opened the door. She stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of tears and sobs. "I'm sorry," she choked out, clutching at my shirt like a drowning woman clinging to a lifeline. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" I demanded, pulling away slightly. "For dragging us into this mess? For putting Jake in danger? Or for lying to me every step of the way?" "All of it," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Everything. But you need to listen to me, James. Please. There's something you don't know." "What?" I snapped bitterly. "Another lie? Another betrayal?" "No," she insisted, shaking her head desperately. "This time, I'm telling the truth. Victor Kane, he wasn't just trafficking drugs or smuggling kids. He was experimenting on them." My stomach churned. "What do you mean, experimenting?" "He's developing some kind of bioweapon," she explained, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Something designed to target specific DNA markers. That's why he wanted Jake. He's a match. If Kane gets his hands on him, he'll use him to perfect the formula." The room spun. A bioweapon? Targeting DNA? None of it made sense, but the fear in Sarah's eyes told me she wasn't lying. Not this time. "And Ethan?" I asked sharply. "Where is he?" Her expression crumpled, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "He didn't make it," she whispered. "Kane found out about the evidence we gathered. About the files we hid. Ethan tried to buy us time, but they killed him." The words hit me like a freight train, knocking the wind out of me. Ethan, dead. My brother, who I'd argued with, resented, and ultimately failed to protect. Gone. Just like that. "I'm sorry," Sarah repeated, her voice cracking. "I should have told you sooner. Should have trusted you. But I was scared. Scared of losing you. Of losing Jake." Before I could respond, another sound echoed through the cabin, the unmistakable hum of a helicopter approaching fast. "They're here," Sarah gasped, scrambling to her feet. "We have to go. Now." Minutes later, we were sprinting through the woods, Jake clutched tightly in my arms, Sarah leading the way. Behind us, the chopper roared closer, its searchlights cutting through the darkness like knives. We weren't going to outrun them, not with Jake slowing us down. Then, just as hope seemed lost, Sarah veered off the path, ducking beneath a cluster of rocks. Hidden behind them was a small cave entrance, barely visible in the dim light. "In here," she shouted, waving us forward. "Quick." We slipped inside, the space cramped but surprisingly deep. As the helicopter circled overhead, its blades slicing through the air, Sarah pulled out a flash drive from a pocket. "This is it," she said urgently, pressing it into my hand. "All the evidence against Kane. Everything we gathered. It's enough to take him down, if you can get it to the right people." "But what about you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You're coming with us, right?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No. I'll lead them away. Give you time to escape." "Sarah." "Promise me, James," she interrupted, her voice firm despite her tears. "Promise me you'll keep Jake safe. No matter what." I stared at her, unable to speak, unable to move. Then, with a final glance at Jake, she turned and ran back toward the helicopter, shouting at the top of her lungs to draw their attention. As her cries faded into the distance, I clutched Jake and the flash drive tighter, vowing to honor her sacrifice. Whatever it took, I would finish what she started. For Ethan. For Sarah. For Jake. Because sometimes, the only way to fight monsters is to become one yourself.